If you found this video, chances are you're looking to migrate from Pardot to Marketo Engage, and you're not alone. Over the last 12 months, we've seen dozens and dozens of companies move away from Marketing Cloud Account Engagement or Pardot to Marketo Engage. And in this video, I'm going to give you all of the know-how to do it successfully, have a completely flawless, as much as you can, migration, and highlight some of the key things that you cannot miss out if you want it to be a success. Hey everybody, my name is Akane Davis. I'm VP of Operations at G&W Consulting, and what we do day in, day out as a MarTech consulting agency is help companies manage their MarTech better. And that goes from migrations to implementations to stand-ups and supports. With that being said, let's jump right into what you need to consider when moving from Pardot to Marketo Engage. Before any migration, the first thing that we like to do is get an inventory of the content that you're going to be bringing over. Naturally, taking stock what you have already in Pardot and making sure that you understand how it's going to move to Marketo is a crucial step in the process. And there's three key areas that are going to be impacted when you make this move from Pardot to Marketo. The first is to understand what are you bringing over from an asset standpoint. This is going to include things like emails, landing pages, forms. While we don't recommend just exporting the HTML and bringing it over to Marketo, we'll cover that a little bit later. The reality is you need to know what you need to bring over. Oftentimes when a migration happens, things like an autoresponder seem pretty straightforward, but then the more nuanced assets, landing pages that you might expect to be there are not there and you're missing out. This also gives you a good chance to kind of clean house and get rid of legacy clutter. It's very soon that you'll realize not everything that's in Pardot needs to be migrated over. Second, you need to look at what automations you plan on recreating inside of Marketo. Operational workflows, data normalization, those things need to be considered as well when making your migration. And last but not least is file migration. Whenever you move to a new platform, the links and the hosting for those old assets, files, whatever they might be, is going to expire. So you need to make sure that you're bringing over your assets if they're not already linked somewhere else. Most often this looks like files, images, PDFs, content guides, whatever it might be. Those will need to be re-uploaded into Marketo, and it's worth making an inventory of what that looks like. By the way, in the description down below, if you want our free content inventory guide that covers everything that we go through when we're doing a Pardot migration or helping a customer do one, check the link in the description below. Next up is your email and landing page assets. Naturally, making a content inventory of your email and landing page assets is important, but also just as important is understanding how you want to bring them over and recreate them. And there's two recommendations that we absolutely make during this process. The first is that when you move to Marketo Engage, we recommend rebuilding your email assets rather than exporting the HTML and re-importing it. Exporting and re-importing the HTML is going to run into a lot of problems. One, with the code base, you won't be able to edit your emails or your landing pages. Second, you'll run into a lot of issues with legacy email links, potentially even outbound links, and maybe even old tracking scripts. That's why it's just better to recreate the emails inside of Marketo, the ones that you need, using email templates or their brand new email builder. It's a little bit of work in the beginning, but the long-term scalability is absolutely worth it and important for your organization to use Marketo to the best of its ability. And the second consideration is unsubscribe considerations. When you're migrating from one platform to the other, there's a chance that people are going to revisit your old emails and attempt to unsubscribe or adjust their preferences. Having that overlap available inside of Pardot is going to be important because when somebody goes to unsubscribe, you want that unsubscribe data to be fed into your CRM, captured, and then referenced in Marketo. The worst thing that you could do is turn off Pardot, turn on Marketo, someone tries to unsubscribe, they can't, and then they get another email from Marketo and get frustrated about it. We want to avoid that as much as we can. So having that overlap is important. Next up is the forms that you want to consider from a migration standpoint. Forms work a bit differently inside of Marketo, and you can either create your own forms, which you can embed on the website, have them referenced through a third-party builder via API, or use iframe landing pages. The last one we definitely don't recommend as often, but it's something that is available if you want to make that consideration. The two key things that I want to call out is one, Marketo does not have form handlers. They're probably not the best way to handle forms anyways. So if you have a website that has a lot of forms, consider using global forms in Marketo or form embeds to be able to make that transition. Another consideration that you want to keep in mind is that forms within Marketo can redirect at the form level. So when I submit a form, I can redirect based on a field that I've provided inside of that form, or I can have a standard redirect based on whatever that form is. If I have a form that I submit on page A and I want to redirect it to page B, I can do that at the form level in Marketo. Or if I choose a country value that is different than what the standard value is, so if I choose Japan instead of United States, I can redirect to a thank you page specific to the Japanese audience or whoever would fill out that country as Japan. The next area you want to consider is your current integrations that you have in Pardot. Naturally, the one that we visit the most often, especially when you're migrating from something like Pardot to Marketo, is the integration with Salesforce. Marketo's integration with Salesforce is genuinely second to none. It's a great integration, but there's a few things that you need to do in advance to make sure that it's seamless. First, you want to set up your integration user within Salesforce. You need a real person license, not an API license, because that particular user is going to have visibility on your fields, how you do your mapping, and all the other considerations around that integration. You don't absolutely need it before you get stood up with Marketo, but it's nice to have your integration user ready to go with all of the steps completed prior to turning on Marketo. That way, when you're ready to connect them, it's pretty seamless. Another consideration that you want to make in Pardot prior to setting up that sync is just knowing that every record that is in Salesforce will sync into Marketo without a custom sync filter. So what we typically recommend is that you have records in Pardot that you want to delete those records in Pardot, delete them from the recycling bin, they'll get cleared out of Salesforce, and then you can set up that integration with Salesforce and Marketo, bringing only over the records that you really want to bring over. Another consideration for the Salesforce integration is what custom fields that you're expecting to bring over into Marketo. The integration user is going to have visibility on all the fields that you allow it to have visibility on. So if there's fields that you don't want it to have visibility on or that you would like to, set that all up prior to setting up the sync with Marketo. If there are any fields that don't exist in Marketo that Salesforce is pushing over, custom fields will be created inside of Marketo to accommodate those fields. And last, when it comes to integrations, you always want to consider what third-party integrations you need to bring over. Third-party integrations could be Zoom, Zoom Info, 6 Sense, other integrations that you're expecting to bake into the Marketo ecosystem. Again, they don't have to be set up as soon as you turn Marketo on, but making sure that you have a documentation of it and what that transition from maybe a Pardot user to a Marketo user is going to look like is going to be important. The next thing to consider is what automations are you doing in Pardot that you expect or need to happen in Marketo. This is really where strategy meets execution, and one of the reasons that we always recommend going with a partner during a Marketo implementation or migration. Now, naturally, everyone can kind of consider operational requirements, so things like lead routing, potentially, lead lifecycle, lead scoring, things that need to happen in Marketo in order to keep that consistency from Pardot into Marketo, depending on what you have. Autoresponders, data normalization, all of those automations that you documented in your content inventory need to then be built out within Marketo and have to be considered as you're making that transition. The way that Marketo builds out its automation is much more powerful than the automation in Pardot or the engagement studio. So it's really great to have someone guide you through that process on how to build that out. In that same vein, things like nurture considerations, if you have nurtures or cross sells or upsells or certain programs that are going to automate based on their expressed interest on the website, build those out in Marketo based on what you have in your content inventory. Again, it also kind of gives you this opportunity to modernize your marketing approach. So maybe what you were doing in Pardot really wasn't working anyways. It's a great chance to revisit that from an automation standpoint. How do we want to approach engagement programs? How do we want to approach long-term nurtures? It gives you a great viewpoint to kind of reset and consider what marketing automation is most important for your organization. Now, while I'm mentioning this as the last point, it's not the last thing that you want to consider, and that's the implementation of Marketo itself. Prior to doing any sort of migration, bringing in any assets, Marketo itself has to be set up, whether that's with the SPF and DKIM, your email tracking links, your brand guidelines and landing page templates and email templates that you expect to be in there. All of those things have to be set up and implemented as you're considering your migration. Now, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier that overlap window, you want to make sure that you have that, but here are 3 things that you really want to consider when doing your implementation. The first is, what does that timeline look like to set up Marketo, start bringing in the essentials from Pardot, and have it up and running? Now, to get Marketo up and running and in a good spot usually is going to take about 3 to 4 weeks just for the foundations to be set up. Your overall migration timeline is typically going to be between 8 to 12 weeks, sometimes longer depending on how large or how complex and advanced your organization is. And realistically, you want to have those strategy conversations as you're making the migration and as you're considering the implementation. Given that 2-month window that you're talking, start planning, start preparing for what that's going to look like. Next up, for your project plan, you want to consider key milestones. What are some of the things that we need to do, and how do we keep this 8 to 12 week or longer timeline pushing forward on a week-to-week basis? If you get stalled out on one area or get hung up on something, having that plan and having that milestone guide the way is going to be a key and very important part of getting everything up and running. For example, one milestone to consider is that whenever you do migrate over your forms or you want to set up some of your emails, it's important to have that Salesforce to Marketo integration set up prior to that. If you have custom fields that you want to capture on forms like UTM values or anything of the sort, that needs to be available inside of Marketo through Salesforce integration prior to that being built out. You're going to save yourself time, headache, especially if you approach it in a very structured and concise way. Now, the last piece, which is an important piece that is often overlooked, is who are you going to partner with during this migration and implementation? Whenever you're considering a project like this, there is a real tangible cost to failure. And that could look like operational inefficiencies. That could look like a loss on your MarTech investment. You don't want it to happen, and you don't want it to happen to you. You want your MarTech implementation to be a success, to be valuable, and to be a really tangible thing that drives revenue, pipeline, and operational efficiency for your organization. Now, naturally, at G&W Consulting, this is something we do day in and day out. And if you're looking for a partner that can help you go through the process, guide the ship, make sure that your migration is successful, please feel free to reach out to us. I put a link in the description as well. So here are my closing thoughts. Moving any platform is a major project, especially if you're moving from something like Pardot, Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, to Marketo Engage. There's a ton of moving pieces, lots of consideration, lots of strategy, and lots of teams that are going to be involved in the process. But whenever you partner with the right people, whenever you consider it from the very beginning with your inventory to how you're going to build your emails to what automations you need to look at, it becomes more tangible. You can bite it off in easier to chew pieces and ultimately have a successful migration and implementation. If you found this video valuable, please share it with someone else that you might know in the B2B space or might be considering their MarTech investment. Give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. And again, my name is Akande, VP Operations, G&W Consulting. I look forward to having you on Marketo Engage.